Well, thank you so much for having me back, and thank you everyone for your patience. I was not feeling well the last time I was supposed to present, kind of out of nowhere, but I feel much better now. So thank you for your patience. Just a quick thing, um, it's probably user error, but if you type a question in the chat, I can't quite see it. So I don't know if you all want to tell me if someone has a question or something. I'm happy to stop as we go along or answer them at the end either way. Um, my name is Jessica Tucker. I'm a registered investment advisor. And so I work with all things financial planning, financial literacy, financial wellness. And so today, the topic that we're going to go over is planning and saving for retirement. And so the format that I've used here is 10 questions to ask yourself while planning for retirement. That way, you kind of have some starting points, and the answers to those questions will help you to create the plan that you need to make sure that you are well prepared for retirement. So we'll start with the first one. So the first question when you're looking at trying to save for retirement is, does my employer offer a retirement plan? The reason why you want to go with that first is because often the employer has a plan that can offer benefits that you can't necessarily get outside of an employer sponsored plan. So there are different types that are available to you. Some places have 401ks, 403bs. The government, military has the thrift savings plan, TSP. Some smaller companies or privately owned companies will have simple IRAs, 457 plans, or Roth 401ks. Those are a little less common, but they are options. And so the current contribution limits, how much you can put into your retirement plan that's sponsored by your employer, right now is $23,000 per year from you as the employee. There's a cap on the total as well that can be contributed to the account per year. That's $66,000 between yourself and your own employer. And your employer can give matches that we'll talk about in one of the other questions. Your employer can contribute a match to your retirement account. And it's basically, they call it free money, but to me, it's not necessarily free because you still have to work there. But it is very nice to have your employer be able to match some or all of what you put into your account. And so the first question would be, does my employer have a plan that's available to me? And then we'll start going through what you need to look at if they do have a plan. Most employers have something. Every once in a while, if it's a small business, they may not have an employer-sponsored plan, but government agencies, federal, state, city, local, they typically have a plan available to you. And so you'll just want to check with your HR and see what type of plan there is. And so then that leads me to the second question which is, does my employer offer a match? So basically, their employers can take your contribution and they can match a portion of it. So the example that I have here is for the thrift savings plan, the TSP, which is federal government or military. And basically, the structure that the federal government has is that you contribute 3%, the first 3% of your income annually that you contribute, the government matches dollar for dollar. The next 2% is matched 50 cents on the dollar. So basically, you're putting in 5, they're contributing 4%. So you're getting, if you contribute the 5%, you're getting a 9% contribution total of your income to your TSP every year. And so to get your what's called your full match, you want to contribute at least 5%. And so different employers have different structures on how they're going to set that up. But it's definitely a good thing to get the match if it's offered. And a caveat that I have here that I'll get into a little more detail later is that most employers, if they're going to give you a match, they will put it in the traditional side of your account, not the Roth side. So we'll talk about the distinction between the traditional and the Roth. But either way, if you can get a match, you definitely want to take it because that's money that's basically a benefit of working for your employer. So the third question I would say to ask is there a waiting period before I can begin my contributions to my employer sponsored plan? So some companies will say you have to work here for a year's time before you can start contributing. Some say you can start contributing, but we will not offer you a match until you are vested for some certain amount of time. And so basically, if there's going to be a lag, let's say that you just started working where you work and you're not able to contribute immediately, there are some other options like Roth IRAs that we'll talk about that you can get into. And we honestly will be talking about Roth IRAs because they're good whether you can start contributing immediately or not. But your HR will have in the rules of their plan, they'll say, this is the structure for this is the plan that we have available to you. This is the structure for the match, and this is when you can start contributing. And so there will be information there with HR that will list out all those rules because they have to make that very clear because they have to treat everyone the same way. They have to give everyone the same opportunity to contribute to those accounts and to get the match if they contribute. Now, there are a few companies that will do a match whether they'll contribute a certain amount whether you contribute or not, but most of the time you have to contribute something in order for them to match it. Most companies will not put that money in there regardless, but there are some. And so that's another thing you want to look at in the rules of your employer sponsor plan. So this topic is a little more nuanced. This question is, do I need a tax break now or in the future? So there are two types of contributions you can make for your retirement. That is traditional and Roth. And so there are traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs. There are traditional 401ks, Roth 401ks, traditional TSP, Roth TSP. So each type of retirement account has a traditional side and a Roth side. So the distinction is this. If you contribute to your traditional IRA, your traditional 401k, your traditional retirement account, you get a tax break now. So if you contribute money to the traditional side, when you go to file your taxes, you will have tax benefits in the year that you made the contribution. But then later in life, when you retire and you take income from that investment account, when you're in retirement and you're not working anymore and you're just living off of those investments, when you withdraw the money, you pay taxes with each withdrawal. Either that or you would have a pretty big tax bill at the end of the year. But basically, you have to pay taxes on it in the future. The Roth IRA, conversely, is that it's considered that you already paid your taxes because you're using after-tax money to contribute to your Roth. But then later in life, you don't pay taxes on the withdrawal. So I've heard it kind of described like this. Let's say you have $1 million retirement account and it's traditional. It's $1 million, but because we don't know what the taxes will be in the future, that amount in reality can be significantly reduced. If you have $1 million Roth, it's $1 million because later in life, when you go to take money out, you don't have to pay taxes then. And so another thing to note on the distinction between the two types is that whoever you designate as your beneficiary after you pass away, whoever inherits your traditional IRA or your traditional 401k, they have a 10-year time period. They must take that money out. So it doesn't matter if your traditional IRA is worth $1 million, they have 10 years to withdraw every single dime from that account. Now they can reinvest it in another type of account, but they are basically going to have to pay taxes on the withdrawal, even though it's an inherited account. With a Roth IRA, whoever inherits your account, they do not have to take it out within 10 years. They don't have to take it out, for a very long time until they're older. I mean, they can keep it for as long as they want, and they don't have to pay taxes. Their taxes are not affected in the same way. So Roth is typically preferential because the taxes in the future are unknown. We know what taxes are now, but the likelihood of them going down is low. The likelihood of them going up is higher. So when you have a larger amount in the future and then you have to pay taxes on them coming out, that can be kind of frustrating. And so the Roth is preferential, but you really have to take a look at your tax situation because you may really need the traditional contribution to get a bit of a tax break now. So a lot of people will do both. They'll kind of weigh out, okay, I want Roth savings, but I also want traditional. So there's a way to do both, and I think that's in the next slide. So we'll go to that. Okay, so the next question is, can I contribute to both the Roth and the traditional? So the first thing you'll want to check into is, does my employer even have a Roth option? Because the Roth side of things is newer than the traditional side. The traditional side has been around a long time. The Roth is a little newer. So not all employers have a Roth option. So you'll want to check and see if they do. Most companies have caught up now and they offer a Roth option. As I said before, when the company puts their match, they usually put it in the traditional side. So basically, if you are wanting to have both types in retirement, if your company offers a match and they put it in the traditional side, even if you only contribute to the Roth, you will still have both types of investments. So the way to determine which route you should go in a very general sense is to look at your prior year tax return. If you owed a substantial amount of taxes and you really need a tax break, you will want to prioritize putting it into the traditional side. If you got a tax return and you're pretty comfortable with your taxes, you can then prioritize the Roth and get that savings going on that side so that you have a nice lump sum in retirement that you will not have to pay taxes on later. So really, it's going to be determined by what your prior year tax return looks like, or what your tax return typically looks like. And people who get into a space where they owe, if you don't have a lot of write-offs in other areas, sometimes you end up owing. And so in order to reduce that, you may want to then prioritize the traditional. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about budgeting, but if you can do both, absolutely do both, because then you get the benefits of having a Roth in the future that you don't have to pay taxes on, and you get the benefit of, hey, I can get a tax break now. So this next question is, do I have room in my budget for outside of employer retirement savings? So your employer will have a plan, like we talked about, the 401k, a 403b, a TSP, those kinds of things. But even if you have an employer plan, and we talked a little bit about the limits of how much you can contribute to that plan. Let's say that your company offers a 5% match. It is often wise to put enough into your employer plan to get the match, but then anything over and above that, do outside of employer retirement savings. The options that you have there, you have about 3 options. The Roth IRA, the SEP IRA, which is basically if you have a side hustle or something where you're self-employed, that will get you a tax break on your self-employed income. Or the third option is a non-retirement investment account. So we'll talk a little bit about the aspects of each one of those. So for 2024, the limit on how much you can contribute to a Roth IRA, this is outside of your employer, because your employer plan, that has a whole different threshold. You can contribute up to I think it was 26,000 to that one. I'll have to look at my other slide. But for the Roth IRA, this is in addition to it. So even if you were to max out your contributions to your workplace plan, that does not stop you from opening these other accounts and contributing here. So a Roth IRA outside of your employer, you can contribute up to $7,000 per year or $8,000 per year if you are over the age of 50. And those are called catch-up contributions. So if you're over the age of 50, they allow you to put in more so that you can catch up. The self-employed IRA, if you have, again, like a side hustle or another business outside of your main employment, you can contribute up to 25% of your self-employed earnings into that account, but you cannot contribute more than $69,000 in a year. So those are really nice because if you have some self-employment income, often you can get yourself into a place where if you don't have enough write-offs for that, you might owe on your taxes, even if you are self-employed and traditionally employed. So what you can do is contribute to a self-employed IRA, a SEP IRA, and that reduces your tax liability for your self-employed income. And so they're really useful in that way. The third type is that non-retirement account. There's no limit to how much you can put in. There's no limit to how much you can take out. Basically, it's not specifically for retirement, but it can be used for retirement. So you can say to yourself, hey, I've got an employer plan, I've got a Roth IRA. If you get to the point in your finances where you still have more to invest, then I would recommend doing the non-retirement account. When you look at the options that you have, the order of importance is contributing to an employer plan with a match, up to the match, then the Roth IRA is secondary, and then the non-retirement account is the third level of importance. And then the self-employed IRA is just dependent on if you actually have that kind of income. Now, when you're contributing to retirement accounts outside of your employer, there are some income limits. So as a single person, your adjusted gross income can, if it's above $146,000 a year, it starts to reduce the amount you're allowed to put in a Roth IRA. And if you are married filing jointly, $230,000 a year of income is when it starts to reduce how much you can put in a Roth IRA. So there's basically a chart online. If you get to that income level, it starts to taper it back. And then at some point, you can't contribute at all. And so that's something to keep in mind when it comes to income limits. And then the self-employed IRA, that limit is $330,000 a year before that starts to get affected. But the nice thing about the non-retirement account is your income is not taken into account. There's no limits on that one either. And so that's the one that really has the freest reign, that you can use it really for anything. It can be used for retirement or it can be used for shorter term goals. And so the next point, that kind of relates to this next point. When you're planning for retirement and you're using retirement accounts, and I'm not talking about the non-retirement because that one you can use before retirement. But when you're looking at IRAs, retirement accounts, specifically 401ks, make sure not to get overzealous with how much you want to contribute up front. Because if you think that you'll need to take the money back out, it's better to wait, because you can end up in a situation where you get taxed and penalized for taking money back out. So you want to, when you're budgeting, look and see what reasonably can I afford to put into my retirement accounts where I won't need to take it back out. Because I've worked with people in the past who, they were excited about investing, rightfully so, and they kind of overdid it a little bit, and then they got into an emergency and they needed the money back out. And so definitely just try to really look at your budget and say, what room do I have? And then go from there. And the last thing to note on this slide is that when it comes to contributing to a Roth IRA outside of your employer, you can contribute, like for example, right now it's February. If you wanted to start a Roth IRA, you can contribute for last year and this year up until tax day of this year. So you can still make contributions for 2023 up until tax day of this year. So each year it's like that. You have until tax day of the next year to make prior year contributions. The self-employed IRA, you actually have past tax day, but I would not recommend that, just because sometimes we can get to the point where we think we have a bunch of time. And then in order to file your taxes, you do need to have the amount earmarked and you want to make sure you do it. So I would recommend still doing it by tax day, but you do actually have a little more time. But both of those are nice because you can make prior year contributions up until tax day of the next year. And so then this question here is, what income would I like to have in retirement? So that kind of can be a hard question, especially depending on how far you are from retirement. But that is the first part. When you're just trying to give yourself a rough estimate, you want to think of this as kind of a living document, something that may change over time, but you want to just have a goal in the near term for what you think that'll look like. Over time, as you get more information, you can change it, but you just want to have something in your mind so that you know what you're working towards right now. So the first thing you want to do is say, how many more years do I have until I can retire? And or until I would like to retire. And I know that's kind of a trick question because some of us want to retire now. And by some of us, I mean me, but you'll want to look and see, okay, realistically, when am I going to retire? And then you want to take the amount, you want to look at your budget and say, how much of my budget can I set aside to contribute each month to retirement? And you'll want to look at the full amount to include your employer sponsored accounts, your Roth IRA if you have it, your non-retirement. You want to include everything. How much do I have in my budget to contribute to retirement in general? And you're going to use that to do a calculation or a projection. And just as an aside, anyone who kind of wants help with that, they say, okay, here are my numbers. I'm happy to like set a quick call with anybody and help you run through what that projection is. The next point is that, let's say your goal for retirement is $1 million, just for even numbers. The safe withdrawal rate, that's the rate that you can take income in retirement and still not eat into the principal to where it kind of dwindles away. That's 5%. So let's say you want to have $1 million in your retirement account. That's going to generate income each year of $50,000. And so basically, whatever your income desire is, you'll have to do the math to say, okay, I desire $50,000 a year. That means then I need to have $1 million saved in retirement. And we'll talk a little bit about, I'll just mention it now. Sometimes when we get to the calculation part about, okay, how much you have to have for retirement, that number can seem like outlandish. Like, oh, how am I going to do that? But one thing you'll want to keep in mind are other sources of income that you'll have. Now, hopefully we'll have Social Security still by the time some of us retire. And so on the Social Security website, you can get an estimate of how much you would be getting in Social Security each month. So you want to take that into play. If you have a side hustle that you enjoy, that doesn't bring you stress, that you'll continue into retirement, that's a source of income you want to consider. If you have rental property, that's a source of income you want to consider. And so when you're looking at saving for retirement, your investment account does not have to be the whole thing, but you'll just want to see what other parts and pieces do I have to be able to create my whole picture of retirement income. And so another thing that's important is that as much as possible, you want to retire without debt. And so that also kind of gets pretty nuanced about how do I position things? How do I balance saving for retirement and paying off debt? How do I do that? And so that's where you do want to kind of sit down with a financial advisor and try to plan that out. But just in a general sense, the best thing to do is to have little or no debt when you retire, so that you don't have to have as much saved for retirement in order to live a very fulfilled life in retirement. So the other thing to note is that, let's say, for example, you can retire 20 years from now. 20 years from now, $1 million won't feel the same as it does now because of inflation. Things, prices will likely go up. It'll feel a little different. And so that's really why it's so important to assess things and say, let me look at my debt profile. Let me kind of plan things all together in context, so that even if, my income, even if it sounds like it's going to be low, I'll be fine because I don't have a lot of debt or things that I have to divert money to. So here's an example retirement scenario. Let's say that you have 20 years until you retire. And let's say that you have in your employer-sponsored plan, between your employer-sponsored plan and maybe a Roth IRA, you have a total of $10,000. Let's say that the total monthly contribution that gets placed into your retirement accounts, this is between you and your employer across maybe multiple types of accounts. So when you see this $1,000 here, that's not me saying you have to put $1,000 yourself into one account to do this. That can be kind of spread across yourself, your employer, and maybe different types of accounts. If you did that and the average appreciation was about 8%, at retirement in 20 years' time, you'd have about $638,000. The income that would generate each year is 5%. Is 5% of that is about $32,000 a year. And so for someone who, let's say someone's retired, they've been saving for that 20 years, and they don't have any debt, they're getting some Social Security income, and they kind of put that together, that they own their home outright. they, depending on how much they can get in their Social Security, they can be pretty comfortable. Or if they can kind of supplement that with maybe work that is fulfilling, work that is enjoyable, work that just is a few hours a week, and it's not like you're 9 to 5 where you have to be, in there and engaged all day long. Just something that brings them some peace and some income that can be added to it, and without debt. You'd be surprised how freeing that is, where it's like, man, when I had these things to pay for, this money didn't feel like as much. But now that I don't have that to deal with, it really is good. And going back to the distinction between the Roth and the traditional, if you're taking out money from your Roth each year and you're not having to pay those taxes, you really are getting a real $32,000. So when we talk about our salaries in our working years, we'll say maybe, okay, I make $60,000 a year, but maybe I really take home 40. And so you'll want to just think about, in retirement, if you have a lot of Roth funds, you're not going to be paying all those taxes. So really, when it's more true to the actual number that you see. Now, if you have the traditional side, that's still a really good thing, because yes, you have to pay taxes, but if you're making less from your investments than you did when you were working, your tax rate could be lower. And also, one final thing to note on this slide is that when you're taking money in retirement, like when we're in our working years, they're taking out Social Security, they're taking out all these extra things. In retirement, they're not necessarily taking all those things out. And so it's just going to be a truer value to the dollar value that you see there. And then this question is important. It kind of goes back to something I said before about being careful about the amount you put in, because you don't want to necessarily have to take it out if you can avoid it. So this question is, will I need to use some of my retirement funds ahead of time? So best practice is to leave your funds until retirement. But if you do have an emergency, I will say that in a lot of cases, taking some from investments can save you in the long run from having to borrow from outside institutions. So there are some options to you. There are 401k loans or TSP loans or just retirement plan loans. The interest rates are often much less than what you find in the marketplace. You definitely, if you take one out, you want to pay it back as soon as possible, because you want to keep in mind that if you change jobs, you have a certain amount of time where you have to pay that amount back in full, or it will be considered a distribution and you'll get taxed and penalized. So best case scenario, you leave all your retirement funds alone. But if you're in a bind, there are like hardship loans. There are primary home loans that you can use if you need some help with down payments. So in those cases, I've used my TSP in the past to help with the down payment for a property, and I think the interest rate was 2%, and the interest goes back to you. It goes back into your investment account. So in some cases, it's better to do that than to maybe take a personal loan out of the bank or something like that. But again, I just want to stress that the best practice is to just leave it there. But if you get into a situation kind of like I did, where it was like, okay, I need this money. If you can really be disciplined and pay it back as soon as possible, that would be great. A special feature of the Roth IRA, this is outside of your employer, is that let's say over the past 5 years, you put in $5,000 to your Roth IRA, but it grew to 10 or 15. You can take back out the 5,000 that you put in without penalty anytime. So, and it's not a loan, you can just take it, because the IRS considers that you already paid your taxes on the contribution. So you can withdraw your contribution at any time without penalty. Again, it is best to leave it there, because you definitely want as much Roth retirement savings as you can get, but that is an option to you as well, that you can get the principal out, but you don't want to take out any of the growth, because if you take out the growth, then you're going to be taxed and penalized for that. But what I tend to recommend for people is, if they have a non-retirement investment account, and I know that's like lower priority, so not everyone's going to have one of those accounts, but if you do have one, if you're going to take money from your investments, take it from there, because those don't have any penalties attached to it. You are free to use it for whatever you want. You don't have to be buying a home. You don't have to be, it really is the closest type of investment to just having money in a bank account. You can take it whenever you'd like, and there's no penalty. And of course, if your goal is to use it to save for retirement, then you do want to leave it as much as possible. But if you have one, and if you have a non-retirement investment account and you get yourself in a bind or something, or if you need to buy a home, you need some down payment money, or you need a car or something like that, if you have it in the non-retirement account, that's really the best case scenario because there's no penalties, no issues, none of that. You can go into your account, send the money to your bank account, and it can be there within a couple of days, and you'll be all set there. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then here's a question that you'll want to ask yourself. Do I currently have investment accounts from previous employers? So sometimes, like I remember there was a job I worked a long time ago. I was probably a late teen, early 20s. And I didn't even realize that I had a retirement account with them. I didn't know any better because I was late teens. And so there was a retirement account and there was a little money in there. And basically, I didn't even realize until I got something in the mail a while later that it had just been kind of sitting there. And I mean, it was kind of nice because it had been accruing a little bit of interest. But you definitely want all of the retirement money that's available to you, even if it's not very much. You still want it and so basically, what I did was after I discovered that, because it was years later that I discovered it, I then made a list of everywhere I worked. And I found their HR numbers, and then I just called to inquire, hey, did I have some retirement savings with you? In my case, it was only the one. The other places I didn't have retirement accounts, but basically I was able to then get that money rolled over and use it for my current retirement. And so that you'll want to check into previous employers, or if you just remember getting some sort of account. Maybe I know some people will get like certain types of accounts where they can just try out small amounts in investing, and maybe you forgot about it. Just kind of think through and say, hey, do I have some previous accounts? Because whatever you have, you want to try to roll it over and consolidate it so that you have a larger pool of money that's growing over time and working in your favor. And so that's something to think about. And it can feel a little tedious, but you definitely want the money that is there for you. I had a client a while ago who worked somewhere 25 years ago or so, and there was a whole retirement account sitting there, and it had just been growing over time. And so we called the HR and of that place, and they found the account, and we were able to get that rolled over. And so you definitely want to make sure that any money that belongs to you, you have it there, and it can kind of help to make your whole retirement picture even better. And so this is the last slide, and then we'll just go through a couple things, and then I'll take any questions that anybody has. But this question is, what barriers do I have to saving for retirement, and what strengths do I have? So it can be really difficult to look at a future need and treat it as being as important as a current need. And that's in any case, when it comes to money, when it comes to anything, it's really hard to focus on something that feels far away, even if it's only 5 years away, 10 years away. It's not now, because we've got real needs that are happening right now. And so it can be difficult to focus on that. So, some barriers could be that, hey, I want to save for retirement, but right now my budget's really tight, or I have really high expense categories. I know that some people, childcare is just out of control. It's so expensive. And, some people live in areas where it's very difficult to get their compensation to match up with the cost of living in a way that is effective. So one of the things that I will talk about with my clients is that, don't turn away from the barriers, acknowledge them so that we can find a solution. so that we can create a plan to address each one and start to remove those different obstacles to saving for retirement. Because time, the time value of money is really it's spectacular. It's like the eighth wonder of the world, that you can get compound interest on the money that you start investing now, and it will really help you in the future. And so, if there's a barrier where it's just like, it's hard for me to focus on that because it's so far in the future, you'll definitely thank yourself. You'll thank your younger self when you're older for not having to continue working in at the same level and magnitude as you did, previously. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can kind of run different numbers. So what I tell people to do is like, hey, let's go through, let's look at your budget, let's see what you really have room to do, and then let's run a scenario to see how much you'll have in X number of years when you retire. If you have a spouse and you are both kind of saving for retirement, you can kind of look at that picture together and then calculate from there how much income you'd be able to take from your combined assets. And so, but once we identify any barriers, you'll want to identify strengths. And so there are some people who are very good at planning. And there are some people who are very good at just general consistency. There are people who, when they get a pay raise, they're okay with still living at the same level before the pay raise. And maybe they can use the pay raise to then place into their investment account. If you have a spouse or an accountability partner, someone who can just kind of walk the journey with you, that's definitely an asset to have when it comes to saving for retirement. You'll when you look back and you say, okay, well, I know there are definitely needs now, and things are getting crazy, crazy expensive. But it's definitely a good thing to be able to say, okay, I'm still going to look out for my future self now. There is a barrier that I tend to encounter a lot, which is, okay, I want to make sure that I'm debt free by the time I retire, and I also need to save for retirement. But how do I balance that? And so, in a very general sense, if let's say you have some debt, but it's really not very much by comparison to your income, then I think it's okay to singularly focus on knocking that out and then commencing to start saving for your retirement, but also in a very general sense. And it's hard to give people advice about this because we really do have to look at their specific circumstance to know for sure. But I'm just kind of giving some general guidelines. But if you're looking at, you have a mortgage on your house and you just bought it, so you've got kind of a 30-year timeline. That's a little bit of a different thing. There's some tips and tricks you can do to kind of knock the mortgage out sooner. You can do things like making one extra principal payment a year. It'll shave years off of your mortgage. And so you can do that in combination with saving for retirement so that you're basically tackling both at the same time. But you're doing it in a way that you're not putting yourself out and not able to take care of your other responsibilities. And so you'll just want to kind of look at your specific situation. And like I said, I'm happy to kind of just get on a call and tag up and talk through your individual situation to make a goal and look at what you'll need for retirement. And one more tip is that when you're trying to figure out the number that you need in retirement, let's say that you make a certain salary now, you make X amount of dollars, and it's maybe it's not lavish, but it's comfortable, and maybe you have a mortgage and a car note or something. What if you're comfortable in what you're making now with a mortgage and a car note? That might be a good place to start for saying that's what I need to make in retirement, because you'll remember that in retirement you ideally won't have any of these debts, and you won't have to be putting into Social Security and spending money that way. So if you can live on it now with debt, that's a good starting point for calculating what I might need in retirement, because then in retirement, ideally, I won't even have certain expenses that I have now. And so that's just something to think about when you say, oh, I wonder, where do I even start with knowing how much I'm going to need in retirement? I would say start with your current salary and just kind of think, am I comfortable? Do I feel like this is just really tight? And if you have high expenses related to maybe children in the house, then you'll want to consider that by the time you retire, maybe they are adults and out of the house. And so those expenses are gone. And so even if it's a little tight now, in the future, that same income may be just fine for you. We do want to keep in mind inflation. It does change how money feels over time, how much it feels like it is over time. But a lot of times we can kind of even it out when we consider taking care of debt, eradicating that. That kind of can balance out the inflation effect. So that, hey, I know it won't be a dollar now, won't be a dollar the same, won't feel the same as a dollar 20 years from now, but I also won't have all these other responsibilities that are kind of cutting into what I need to take care of. So basically these are these are the 10 questions that I would say to just get yourself started on planning for your retirement. And as much as you can, if you can do kind of like a set it and forget it, that, hey, this is the amount that I'm going to put towards my retirement. It comes, it comes out of my paycheck automatically, or it comes out biweekly when I get paid automatically. It's really good to have that, because then you'll kind of look up one day and compound interest has just been kind of doing its thing in the background without you having to work on it. And really, it's one of the best ways to have your money work for you, while you're not having to work the extra hours to gain what you can gain in interest there. And so the last slide, it says, when it comes to investing, the best time to begin was yesterday, but the second best time is now. And so even if you feel like, oh my goodness, I'm too late, I should have started before. If you start now, there's always a plan to be made. There's always a solution to be had. And so if you can start now, if you can get yourself in a plan and you can stay consistent over the next however many years until you retire, you will definitely be much better off than if you just kind of say, oh man, I feel like I'm behind. Because I've talked with a lot of people who they feel like they're behind and it makes them kind of want to shy away from it. And I say, no, let's make a plan. Let's get it going and let's run a calculation. And people are often surprised when I run the projection of, if you put in this much and your employer puts in this much and it grows this much over this many years, this is how much you'll have. People are often so surprised because they think, well, that's not enough. That can't be enough. But compound interest really comes in and really gives us the boost that we really couldn't do on our own. So that is the end of that. And so I'm going to come out of the screen and
do we have any questions? I saw the chat box pop up, but I was working on the attendance sheet. Hold on one second. Let me get to it. Okay. We just have, looks like a comment and question. Okay, the first one is, I get that employers think it's fair, but I've been in employment situations where I got terminated and they were able to remove all of my contributing funds. So I would recommend people be careful with it.
That is true. You'll want to look at the rules for vesting, because once you are considered vested, that is your money. That even if the employer has contributed, but that's a very good point, Melinda, because if you work for a company that has the right to keep their portion, my recommendation typically is to start with a Roth IRA instead, or something outside of the employer if they have the rights to the money. Especially if you think that you may be, leaving, or it may not be a long-term thing. If you're at a certain place of work and you're like, okay, I'm not really quite sure that I'm going to be here, you definitely want to take that into account. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I have most of the time, people I've worked with, they've invested, we've been able to move all the money, but I can think of 2 times specifically that the company kept their contribution, and it was significant. I mean, one, I remember it was about $8,000 they kept, and the other was about 12. And there was nothing we could do. The people had already moved on from the job, and we couldn't get it back. And so, absolutely right, that is something to be careful about. And you'll just want to look into the rules of your employer. When am I vested? When do those funds belong to me? Because then in that case, you can go, if you need to move or change jobs, you can just do that. And that money then belongs to you. And then you said I have investment accounts because my family handed them down, and make it a best practice not to touch my investments unless it's a dire emergency. Yes, and that really is wisdom, because when we start, what I try to tell people is try to think of your investment accounts like they're not even an option. Like, as much as you possibly can, that they're not an option to touch. Now, definitely, I would prefer for someone to, maybe take like a 401k loan at 2% than to take a personal loan at 20. I mean, if they're really, really in trouble. But it's like you said, if it's a dire emergency, but I think we want to be really wise about, let me evaluate, is this a dire emergency, or is there something else I can do to get the funds in a way that will not take away from my retirement account? Because again, even if you take a loan from your 401k, if you all of a sudden need to leave your job, if you don't pay it back within the designated amount of time, in some places it's like 60 days after your last day of work, if you don't pay the whole amount back, then you're taxed and penalized. And that can be really detrimental to the balance of your investment account. So thank you for those comments.